I'll give a little introduction for Dr. Courturier. I met Marc in person at the Eclipse meeting in Charlottesville in June, where he gave a similar talk. And I was so impressed by it that when I came back, I started the process of inviting him for grand rounds because I know he's very popular. But Marc's background includes receiving his bachelor's degree from Acadia University in Nova Scotia, followed by his PhD in Edmonton at the University of Alberta in the Department of Medical Microbiology and Immunology, Bacteriology, followed as a postdoctoral fellow for a year in the Alberta Provincial Laboratory for Public Health in the Department of Molecular Diagnostics / Microbiology. And then he came to the University of Utah Department of Pathology in Medical Microbiology as a fellow for 2 years, and then joined the faculty in 2011. And he has a remarkable career. He's Mr. Microscopy. I venerate microscopy, and Marc is a very established microscopist in parasitology and other areas. He's the medical director of parasitology / fecal testing, infectious diseases, antigen testing at ARUP, and the medical director over emerging public health crises as well at ARUP in Salt Lake City. And he's professor of pathology in the Department of Pathology at the University of Utah, and is also the CPEP Fellowship Director in Microbiology. So with that introduction, Marc, you can start. And thank you so much for being with us.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I'm coming off of like 2 weeks of bronchitis. So if I go in a coughing fit, I'll try to mute myself quickly. So I love talking about this subject because I think that there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about machine learning. So I'll kind of reiterate several times that machine learning and artificial intelligence is not truly intelligent. It's only as good as the data going into it and the people teaching it. And so I'm going to use some examples throughout this talk of AI-generated images that I've integrated into some of these slides, just to show you how impressive and embarrassing AI can actually be if you don't give it the right direction. So relevant disclosure for this talk is TechSite, which is a company in Utah that we've partnered with for AI development. My other conflicts of interest are not relevant to this subject. So we're going to start with just an overview of what do we do in classical parasitology on the microscope. And then we'll do a bit of a dive into how we do machine learning for image analysis and using examples of how we trained AI to solve problems with permanent stain slides. And then we'll review kind of that workflow and some of the future work that we're doing with wet mount exams. So if we look at the reverse chronology of parasitology, the newer technologies for detecting parasites are multiplex stool gastroenteritis panels. And these are, rapidly deployed into many labs. They're fast, they're expensive, but they're sensitive. Before that generation of testing, we had antigen testing. Antigen testing was rapid, it was fairly sensitive, and it targeted the 2 or 3 most common parasites that we would be expecting in the clinical lab in North America. And then we have the microscope. The microscope is a dear tool to us, but it's also sometimes a nightmare. So for those who are not parasitology bench jockeys, or even not in microbiology at all, I just kind of want to go through some of the pain points in stool microscopy to give you an appreciation of why AI was applied to parasitology instead of some other heavier hitting, high clinical impact areas. So parasitology by microscopy is really limited only to the operator. So anything you can see on the microscope and identify, you can diagnose. And personally, I find it fun, but I'm also not doing, 100 to 200 of these a day. I mainly do consults and back reads. The cons are numerous. It's not sensitive. You have to have really well-trained people. It's difficult to maintain those people, and it consumes a ton of time and FTEs to keep this testing online, and it's very low margin. And our workforce basically is finite for this. People get burned out on the scope. They retire, and we can't get younger people or newer educated med techs to even want to come into this field. So a standard O&P by the North American standard is an iodine stained wet mount, and it's paired with a trichrome stained permanent slide made from the same stool specimen. Now, in some labs, a modified acid fast stain may also be added on. So this is variable in North America. Some labs do it by automatic process, and some do it just by physician request. But the reason I'm mentioning that is because we're going to talk about both these stains. So O&Ps by conventional medical teaching should be done with a minimum of 3 unique stool specimens collected on at least 3 to 5 day interval on a single patient. And it's generally recommended that this testing be reserved to patients who have immunocompromise, an exposure history or travel history that would be compatible with parasites, or that has clinically presenting persistent or chronic diarrhea. But what we find out is that physicians don't actually order them this way. They basically see it as a catch-all test and just throw it onto an order for everybody. So I can actually update this number, we're up to about 125,000 O&Ps a year, which equals 250,000 preps if you consider each O&P gets a trichrome and a wet mount. So here's an example of AI doing AI things. So I prompted AI to make a picture of a physician using tools incorrectly. And you can see when you don't explicitly tell AI that the tools you are intending are medical tools or microscopes, it kind of just goes with what it has for data. So it's really just a bunch of work tools and a destroyed car. So what goes into the O&P process? Why do we want to get rid of a lot of this volume so bad? So we've automated a lot of our upfront processing, but the majority of labs do not have that benefit. So most of this is done manually. So you concentrate your stool. Many labs do that by gravity concentration, which is time consuming and messy. Then decant the stool, do your preparation of the specimen, making the slides, get your wet mount and your trichrome, and then look at it on the microscope. That whole process can take, anywhere from 2 hours to 4 hours, depending on your process. And again, that's for one specimen that compounds as you add more. So the average wet mount run is, in the convention that we did our volumes, not every lab's going to have the type of volumes we do. We would batch 30 trichrome slides and 30 wet mounts, so 30 patients essentially. We would put them on these big trays. And this would take about 2.5 to 3 hours a run for a technologist to read. 98% of these are negative, and every positive has to be read by a second technologist. So this can take anywhere between 2 to 5 minutes a slide. And this is obviously variable. If the technologists are really good and experienced, they're on the faster side. If they're newer, less confident, it's going to be on the slower side. And it's those questionable negatives, the slides that may have artifacts or a lot of unusual debris, those slides can take even longer. Those can take up to 10 minutes. And I'm just one apology. I'm trying to hide the controls from Zoom. They're blocking my slide view. There we go. Pardon me, technical malfunction. Okay, so this is an example of a wet mount. So I put a box around the entamoeba cyst here in the field. Now that's pretty easy to see because it's, I've kind of cropped it out by itself. And then the trichrome, you can see these slides can get really messy. So in this slide, I've boxed 3 different Giardias. There's actually about 8 in this field, but these are the 3 obvious ones. So you imagine someone having to navigate across these slides and identify things like this. It's time consuming. The modified acid fast is a little bit easier because the stain's a bit cleaner and you're only looking for 3 organisms. So here, I didn't even box it because I think hopefully everyone can appreciate that the fuchsia colored spheres in the middle of the slide are your targets. That's cryptosporidium. And all the background is this kind of faded green. So concerns for O&P reading. From the technologist standpoint, we really worry about the effects of reading this many slides in a day. So it strains people's eyes. They can get neck pain. They burn out emotionally. They're not satisfied doing this all day. And the accuracy is a concern. So how much experience does the person have? Are they rested? Are they distracted? Is it the morning? Is it the afternoon? Is it their first batch of the day, their second batch of the day? Heaven forbid they're trying to get a third batch in. And then for specimens that have a low parasite burden, there's a bias over time that can exist, these perception of you think you see something, but you're really not sure. So again, here's a great example of AI trying to generate a medical technologist injured by a microscope. I don't know why his hand is coming out of the back of his head, even though it's bandaged to his head. So another great example of AI is not as sophisticated as popular media may think it is. So is there a way we can make these processes more efficient, more accurate for the laboratory and for patient care? And we felt that digital imaging and machine learning may be a way we could do that. But I will admit there was a lot of skepticism in the early days. So digital imaging is really, for a microscope slide, capturing a series of images and then virtually threading them together for a machine, like an AI algorithm, or a human to look at manually. They have to be high resolution. It's going to be easy to review. It's going to be time efficient. You can't scan for 2 hours a slide. That just doesn't work. It's got to be user friendly, or technologists won't want to use it. And it's got to be as good or better than the current standard of microscopy. If it doesn't pass these metrics, it was never going to be integratable into our lab. So another image here. This prompt actually was fairly creative. It's stitching together images into a quilt. That's what the AI interpreted as threading images together. You can see it integrated. It put in a virus on the TV screen. And the microscope actually looks like a little computerized robot doing the stitching. So we do our machine learning for image analysis using a type of AI called convolutional neural networks. And this is the type of image analysis, image matching tool that Google Images used years ago, where you could search Google for an image. And then there was a button at the bottom where when you clicked on the picture, you could say, show me more. And what it would do is it would search the internet for other images that looked like the image you found. And that's a CNN, basically. So what we're doing is we're giving data input. And so in this case, I'm going to use an analogy of dogs. So there's various types of dogs, and they're akin to our parasites. So the CNN extracts features. Now, we see dogs, we see coats, snouts, ears, tongues, but a CNN doesn't really work that way. It sees pixel density features. It's ignorant to what a dog is. And then it classifies the different types of dogs images based on the features that it extracts. And then you can feed in more examples of the different dogs, and the CNN can basically start putting the classes together to keep them separate. Then you can refine the model. You can have multiple models in early development. Some will fail, some will succeed. And then you give more data, more examples, more variety of the dogs, so to say. And eventually you'll get to the point where if you've trained it to recognize a husky, it won't just recognize one type of husky. It'll recognize the various types of huskies, Malamutes, Americans, Siberians. But you could also get to the point where it can recognize something that looks like a husky that's not a husky. So this image on the left, you can see that's a wolf. But the AI may find that and mistake it as a husky, but you can actually remediate and train it to recognize that that's a wolf and eventually separate those two classes so that it knows a husky and it knows a wolf. That's going to come up later. I'll show you a wolf. That's important. So some of the words I'm throwing around just to define. So a class, when I talk about a class, that's a bunch of images for which we know the identity to be true. So Giardia as a class, we've given images, we've trained it. Class confusion is when the AI knows two different classes and misclassifies them because they're similar. So Giardia and Dientamoeba is a good example. Or the husky and the wolf if they were both trained. And then exemplar data. This is important when you're training, that the data you're putting in is high quality data. You want to train with textbook images to start. You can have variations of quality, but know that if you train too heavily with poor quality data examples, it can really negatively affect the performance of your model. But if you train with a variety of good quality exemplars, then what you can do is get to the point where even though these ones that are struck out you wouldn't want to train on, your model will still recognize them as Giardia, but you wouldn't train on them because they would basically make your model drift away from truth. So we used a supervised learning approach for this training just because stool samples are so messy. There's so much going on visually with them. So with this approach, an expert's box, they draw a box basically around what truth is. So Jess Cohen and Blaine Matheson here on this slide did the lion's share of this work. So the expert is going to put a box around the things that are true, but they can also put a box around things that are garbage. So background debris, fecal debris that's not a parasite. And that can help guide the AI to know what it should look for and what it should ignore. Eventually, with enough data, the software will start trying to predict organisms when you run iterations of it overnight. And then it'll box what it thinks are objects. And then with supervised learning, the expert goes in the next day, looks at the data, and either confirms the identification or denies it and puts it in this garbage bin, which we call an anti-class. And the software runs iterations again and again and again. It'll identify more correct and incorrect things. And eventually, the software learns from the remediation from the expert. And in our experience, for the stool parasites, after about 1,000 organism examples of a class, these predictions become very accurate. But your model's only as good as the data going into it. And so your scanner quality matters. So we did a lot of early proof of concept work with a scanner called the Modic. So the Modic struggled with fine details for focusing. And it required these Z stacks that were pretty big. They had massive file sizes. It took about 20 minutes to scan the field of the trichrome slide. And it had a very small sample volume load. So you basically had someone babysitting it, constantly feeding in every 5 slides. So for our volumes, this was not really a long-term solution. So we moved to a scanner called the 3D Histech Panoramic 250. So this has much better fine detail and used a 40x ocular with an 80x digital magnifier to get us closer to the range we use in parasitology. So the 250 designation is actually the slide loading capacity. So this could actually load batches of 250, which is getting more into the ballpark of our volumes. And it uses an algorithm called an extended focus. And the way that this works is it would focus up and down and find a good depth where the majority of the field is in good, sharp focus, take an image, and then move to the next field, and then assemble a mosaic of this entire field. And this algorithm is actually really good for a trichrome because it is kind of like a Martian landscape. There's hills and valleys. It's not just a nice, even monolayer like blood. But for long-term development, there's a bit of a problem with this scanner. As you can see on the image to the right, this box kind of sticks out at about a 35-degree angle, and that's where the slides load. So for permanent stain slides, it's fine. But if we put web mount slides in there, they're going to just slide off and drip. So this is not a long-term solution for all of our needs. But hopefully what you can appreciate with this side-by-side is just the image quality. So these are Entamoeba histolytica, very important organism for us to be able to detect. At the top is the scan images with a modic. They're fuzzy, kind of washed out. The coloring is not ideal. And the bottom is on the 3D Histech. So just nice, crisp details. The nuclei are in focus. The cytosols, you can see the vacuoles clearly. So we knew that this was more of a solution for what we needed. So in 2018, we were looking for something that could increase our speed of slide review, make it easier, and reduce the work in the process. And so the goal was, if we could just screen out 70% of our negative specimens confidently without having to look at them on the microscope, that would leave us with 30% of our volume. And that would represent essentially 20% false positives on the AI, and then the remaining 3% would be our true positives containing parasites. And this image prompt on the right I thought was hilarious. So I generated the AI saying, show me achieving your goal while doing a minimal amount of work. I do wonder if AI knows me well because it knows hockey is my favorite sport and somehow chose hockey as the image generation. But you can see how ridiculous this is. Players flying through the air, potato chips flying through the air. So what is success? In this field, we really had to define it because if we use traditional metrics of laboratory testing, it doesn't really represent the performance of an AI model for microscopy. So you need to have a reasonable context to evaluate how a model can be used. So we defined our performance at a slide level. So our contention is that when a human looks at a parasitology slide, they see the whole story, they see the whole slide, and they generate a final answer. That final answer is X, but it's not like they do that just based on one organism or one field. They often have to look at the entire picture. And so the AI model is capturing everything, and it's documenting it in an image output interface, but it's not giving you a final answer. It's just showing you a collection of evidence, and the human has to make the final determination. of whether to pull the slide and look at it manually or whether everything it's seeing is garbage. And so if you think about that on an organism level, let's say a glass slide has 250 parasites on it. It's unrealistic to expect the model to detect all 250. And if it doesn't, to say that it missed that slide. This isn't oncology, it's a different application. So if you wanted to make it 100% specific so that it would only call out correct organisms and never be wrong, you're going to lose sensitivity. And the application that we wanted for this isn't so much the specificity as we want high sensitivity. We don't want to miss anything using AI to screen slides. We're okay if the technologist has to look at some junk. So I'm going to use these graphs to try to depict this idea. So if we have our slide populations parsed out into a bimodal distribution, so we have negatives and positives, and we put a performance metric line at that yellow vertical line. So if this is where the AI model performs, everything we identify with the model is going to be true, but it's going to miss some positives. That represents the left lower area of that blue graph. What if we tune the performance to be where this vertical line is? Well, then you identify everything that's true, but it also shows you some junk. But the human can arbitrate the junk with the confidence of knowing it hasn't missed anything. Ideally, what you want to do, though, is find a sweet spot where you can push that performance over. So those metrics represent detecting all positives and having a minimal amount of false positives. So I try to think this and describe it more as it's a tool to help the process. It's not a replacement of a human in the lab. So this is augmenting our workflows. Think about a multi-channel pipette or an automated liquid handler. They never replaced the molecular biologist or the serologist. All they did was make it more efficient, more accurate, more reproducible, and make it so people aren't burning out as much physically. So let's use some ridiculous image examples to kind of walk through what I mean by the value of a slide level performance and tuning to be sensitive at the expense of some specificity. So let's say your analytical model is 10% sensitive. So you have a slide containing true Giardia, weird looking Giardia, and distractors or artifacts that are not Giardia, like the guy in the Halloween costume with the Giardia shield. So if the AI finds one organism on the slide, it wins. And that's no different than a human. If a human finds one, even if there's 10, you still win. But that's risky. So what if your model is 80% sensitive? So it's going to find 8 out of 10 true Giardia on a slide. Well, that's much better, but I can tell you that it gets challenging to get that type of performance. What you want to try to get to is 100% sensitivity. So every true Giardia gets boxed, but I can tell you what happens typically when you get to that point is you start to drift into anything that at all looks like Giardia gets boxed. So would this be a problem? So if all the Giardia was boxed and then one random false positive gets boxed, so that's not a problem because a human can look at that and interpret the collection of data and say, yeah, there's Giardia here. I'm just not going to worry about that one. Is this a problem? If you have a slide full of distractors and the AI randomly boxes one to show you, well, it's not a problem because the expert can look at that and say, that's junk. What about this? This is a problem. Your model is not doing you any favors at this point. If it's just saying everything is potentially Giardia, you're having to look at everything, every slide. And that gets you to a point of no efficiency gains, no workflow gains. So at this point of the talk, I'm going to jump out of the PowerPoint and I'm going to show you our interface that we use for our trichrome stains. Again, AI model prompted with sneak peek inside view of a trichrome model viewed by pathologists. And you can see it's the same guy's face on two people. All right, so hopefully I'm still sharing and you're seeing my interface. So this is actually our training interface. It looks a lot like...
We're actually still seeing your PowerPoint.
Oh, you are? Okay. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. How's that?
Yep, that's good.
Okay.
So this interface, again, we developed this with a company in Utah called TechSite. This interface is our training interface. This is where Blake Matheson and I do most of the data analysis, data review. So none of this has patient identifiers. These are all dummy specimens that we use during various training processes. And the interface my technologists use in the lab is very, very similar to this, but there's a few features and functions that they wouldn't see. So I want to show you an example of a negative slide. So a negative slide, like I said, we want it to be absolutely sensitive at the expense of some specificity. So when this opens, we will be shown images that the AI thinks might be organisms. But a typical negative has very few images. So if I click on blastocystis, I can see 4 examples here that are clearly not blastocystis. Now my text don't see this, but these numbers at the top, those are confidence scores. So in these cases, the software is not confident these are real. If I go to the next class down here on the left, Giardia, I can look at this and immediately know there's no Giardia here. And then Entamoeba harmoni, again, these are not Entamoeba. And then white cells we call out white cells if they're 3 or 4 plus or higher, just to tell people there's inflammatory processes. And same with red cells. So there's really nothing on this slide of concern. So that's a typical negative. So that speeds up the review process quite quickly. That would be about a 10 to 15 second review for one of my technologists. Now, let's say we have this slide. I'm going to click on the rare Giardia. This was actually a clinical specimen that was called negative by the humans in real time. So again, false call 5, blastocystis. But let's look at this Giardia. These are absolutely real Giardia. So on our left, this is kind of a thumbnail strip that the AI generates for us of all the boxes that it finds. And again, some of them are out of focus, but it's 99.7% confident that that's Giardia. And it is Giardia. So all these Giardia, some of these I could put in a textbook and you would never know that they were captured by AI. The quality is so good. But if I click on one, on the right pane, it actually brings me to the virtual microscope. And I can change objectives to see this at different heights. So I can see the entire scene around it and all the stool. Or I can go right into ADX. And this is our digital multiplier view. So this is what the scanner maximizes at. It's a great resolution, very easy to arbitrate. And again, that was reported as negative originally by a human. That slide was entered into training as a negative and it found the rare Giardia. So let's look at this example. This is an SAF fixed slide. So SAF is probably the worst fixative in the world for parasitology. SAF distorts the view of things. So these are blastocystis. They look awful, but they were detected still by AI. These are Giardia. You see, compared to the other one, just absolutely awful looking. But the AI could still identify them with high confidence. So we hate this slide, these fixative in these slides, because these organisms, even this Dientamoeba fragilis, are just so hard to identify. But the model can still do a very good job of identifying and detecting these. And again, so this slide would be pulled, the microscopist would look at it and confirm what was in there that's positive. And then I'll show you some data that we're going to talk about in a second here, the modified acid fast stain I kind of alluded to in the introduction. So in this slide, we have what we call ghosts. And ghosts are when the organism doesn't stain. So what you can see here is in this count, we have 20 cyclosporas that stain, and you see them in pink. If I click here, you see the pop-out view on the right. Let's go down to 40x. So those are pretty obvious in pink. But if we go to the ghosts, this is the same organism, and it has a propensity to exclude stain. So if I click on this, you can see actually in this field, there's two ghosts on the right, side by side. And we train the software to recognize both. So this is the interface that our lab is basically using to do slide review and to determine what slides have to be manually read. So let's jump back into the PowerPoint. And at the end, if anyone wants to see more of that, I'm happy to bring it back up. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just having trouble getting my slides to load up again. All right. Can I just confirm everyone's seeing my PowerPoint again?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so the question everyone wants to know is, how does AI actually compare to humans? So we did a study where we looked at 120 previous positives from our lab, historically archived, and we scanned them in. The AI confirmed all but one, but it also found 15 additional organisms across these slides that humans had missed in real time during diagnosis. So that's about 12% of our archive positives have been incorrectly identified by humans. And again, that's not a shot at our staff. I think our staff are amazing. It just shows the power of these AI models. So the one specimen that the AI did not identify, it missed one organism, but it actually detected two others in that slide. So to be completely fair with it, we'll say it's a miss. So it's 0.8% of positive specimens are missed by AI. But again, it still identified other things in that slide. So it would have prompted a review. So where do we find a sweet spot to make these models work for us? And so this is called a CCC chart, a confidence class chart. And this is where you basically take all your performance data of your model and you can apply different confidence threshold. That's these numbers going down the left side of the chart, going 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. Those are our confidence charts. And basically, we're trying to look at all of our data on the performance of the model, and we want to apply a confidence threshold that maximizes the green, those are true positives, and minimizes the orange and red, false negatives and false positives. And to simplify this for you, the 0.4 confidence threshold is where we found the best balance of maximizing true positive detection and minimizing false negatives and false positives. Once we had that, the next step was to see if we could minimize the scanning time for the slides. So a full slide on the scanner takes 25 to 30 minutes, but that's not time effective. And that's not really fair because our technologists don't look at the entire slide. So we did some mathematical modeling to determine what's the minimum area that the scanner needs to look at to be equal or better than a human, knowing the number of fields of view that a human looks at. And we determined that if we put a profile in the lower third of the slide, approximately the size of that green box, that scan time will take about 4 to 5 minutes, and it'll be equivalent approximately to what a human reviews. So that's all theoretical. We need to know if that's actually true. So we took a positive specimen that has Giardia and blastocystis in it, and we did a serial dilution in negative stools. And then we prepared duplicates of this preparation. We fed it through the laboratory blindly, so no one knew that these were challenge specimens. And then we read them with the AI after scanning the duplicate slides. And then we looked at the analytical sensitivity using this constrained slide area. And I think this is where the data really finally hit us. So in the left column is a dilution series read by the technologists. You can see that at about 1 to 8, the first miss happens. It picks up again at 1 to 16, and they documented they were rare. And then from 1 to 32 onward, they're negative. If you look at the right column, the AI continued to detect both target organisms all the way down to 1 to 256. So even with this smaller scan area, the AI was still 4 to 6-fold more sensitive than a human. So at this point, we're confident that this is going to work. So we locked down the software, so there's no further training of the AI. It's not learning anymore. It's stuck with what it knows. And then we defined a holdout slide set, and we gave it to TechSite to do validation of the actual software itself. And then we had another unique validation slide set that's never been trained on. So AI has never seen these specimens. And we use those to validate. So all this development took over a year. The actual validation took less than 2 weeks. So most of the work goes in the upfront development. Validation was successful. We trained the lab on this process, and then we went live, and no one would have even known we were using it. Because again, the AI is not generating a result. It's just a tool in the process. So during validation, we repeated limit of detection studies. So we took 4 serial dilution sets, ran them through the lab and through AI. In the humans, and the 4 dilutions never detected below 1 to 16. The AI detected consistently down to 1 to 256 again. And here's an AI image prompt of a machine defeating a medical laboratory scientist. So I thought that was pretty funny what it was able to come up with. So for slide level accuracy, like I mentioned, we really have to be a little bit trailblazing on what we're talking about. So we want to show a slide to the AI and to a human, but we don't want to say, well, you have to detect everything on the slide or else you're wrong. So I kind of already went through that idea. So as long as the AI presents images to an expert, and the expert can immediately look at that and say, that's real, then that counts as a true positive detection. But if the image quality is poor to the point that the expert has to pull the slide, we define that as a false positive by the AI if it's so indiscriminate. And so with those definitions in our study, we basically found approximately 98% positive percent agreement and negative percent agreement with AI and manual microscopy. But we also found a wolf in this process. So once we basically finished validation and started to deploy, we ran into this interesting observation. In our blastocystis class, we were catching these things on the right with the arrow, and those are not blastocystis. So that's cyclospora. And cyclospora is an important human pathogen that's become endemic in the summer in the United States and this country. So as you can see, they're both little spheres, not particularly a lot of characteristics. Cyclospora kind of looks like it has a wrinkled interior. But it was enough that the AI identified it as blastocystis, even though it was cyclospora, because it didn't know what cyclospora was. So we went back and we trained cyclospora. And while we were at it, we said, well, if we're going to train cyclospora in the trichrome, which is not where you usually detect cyclospora, why don't we develop a modified acid-fast model too? Since there's really only two organisms that we really need to worry about, and that's Cryptosporidium and cyclospora. So again, I kind of mentioned already in the interface sneak peek, ghost forms and stained forms have to be detected. Could we make a model do that? And I've kind of already shown you, yes, we could. Cystoisospora is the third organism you can detect in modified acid-fast, but it's really not great in that stain. It's not very sensitive at all. So we typically rely on bright field microscopy and UV. It's also fairly rare, so we didn't include it in the first version of this model. So here's some examples of the cyclospora oocysts that are stained. And here's an example of the ghosts. So we trained on both of these types and then rolled them into one class, just cyclospora. And then Cryptosporidium, again, slightly smaller spheres. And when we, just a quick validation summary, again, this was much simpler because it was only two organism types. We had 40 total positives and 100 negatives. And basically what we see is, again, keeping our performance metrics in mind that we want, the positives were all detected and 3 negatives were flagged by the software as positive that weren't positive. But again, this would just trigger the slides to get pulled and reviewed. So it still knocks out a lot of our negative work, which is important. And again, our limit of detection study, almost the same as the trichrome, same trend. Humans with 3 dilution series, none of them were detected below 1 to 8. So it was 1 to 1, 1 to 2, and 1 to 8. The AI detected did 1 to 256 on 2 of the series and 1 to 512 on the 3rd series. And we integrated this into the lab in 2021. And again, to an outsider, you would never know we were using it. So here's something we ran into that I thought was interesting shortly after the modified acid-fast integration. So we do daily QC scans where we do a qualitative view of the scan to make sure it scanned the slide completely in the area of target and that it quantified a consistent number of organisms every day. So we have the same slide that we scan multiple times. What we saw was that between March 9th and April 22nd, our QC was actually getting better, which is kind of weird. You wouldn't think that's a good thing, but or a bad thing, but how are we detecting more on the same slide? So here's the scan from March 9th. And there's the scan from April 22nd. I'm going to jump back and forth. So what you should notice is the background is more blue on March 9th, and it's whiter by the 22nd. And there's fewer red boxes, which are the target Cryptosporidium, and more red boxes by April. So what's happening there? The scanner is actually photo bleaching this control slide. So over time, we're actually getting increased detection, which again, it's not a bad thing, but it made us have to change our process and have to make more frequent QC slides so we could define our QC ranges and keep them in range tighter. So that was just an interesting problem when your QC actually becomes too good. So the last thing I'd like to show you as we close is the most hot off the presses stuff. This is moving away from permanent stains to the more challenging wet mounts. So here's my AI prompt that actually went completely off the rails to show you just how weak AI can be without a good descriptive data set. In this case, it does not know what to do with this prompt that I gave it. And again, we have 3 of the same people on the right panel, which is kind of hilarious. So practical challenges we face with wet mounts. That 3D histech I mentioned already, it loads at an angle, so we can't use that scanner. Iodine makes wet mounts dry fast, about 20 to 30 minutes. So if we're going to do batch loading, that's going to be a problem. And then Brownian motion in a liquid milieu causes things to float. And so if you're trying to do a scan unless the scanner is doing really fast capture, you might get some blurring. So we started playing with this other scanner called the Hamamatsu NanoZoomer S360. So this is high throughput. It has a horizontal loading capacity, so that takes care of the dripping issue. It's got a 40x high resolution objective, which is what we use for wet mounts as is. But we've been fighting some issues with it. So we've got some depth of focus issues. It doesn't have the same focus algorithm that the 3D Histech does, where it goes up and down, finds things in focus, and then captures the image. And you have to kind of program where it focuses. And I'll show you this in a second. And then the scan speed. The way it scans, our slides were drying out. So we had to completely develop a new mounting medium with iodine to get around this. So here are depth of focus issues. So at the top, the gray rectangle is supposed to be a cover slip. And then the bottom, big, thick rectangle is a microscope slide. And so we have this kind of like depth of fluid under the slide. And this could have eggs, it could have protozoa. And what we saw is that the eggs tend to float higher into the depth of the milieu, and the protozoa tend to be at the bottom. And that's just a density issue. It's probably because there's bubbles and lower density components of the eggs. And so we had to actually train the scanner to capture two completely independent scans of the slide, one just below the surface of the cover slip and one just above the glass slide. Unfortunately, that's really clunky to program. Hamamatsu was not the easiest to work with on that. And so we're not sure if this is going to be workable in the long term. So the mounting media was a challenge too, because again, like I mentioned, iodine dries fast, it's fluid, so it causes scanning problems. So we need something that's more viscous, that'll dry slower. So we played with different iodine and glycerol concentrations to come up with a new media. And here are some of the images taken with it. So Chylomastix is one of the smallest organisms. And it's, if you know what this organism looks like, this is actually perfect morphology. The Giardia looks great. Strongyloides looks absolutely amazing, just beautiful. Trichuris eggs look great. Balantioides coli, this is the largest ciliate, the only ciliated human pathogen, looks fantastic. And so I'm going to show you just in closing some data that's a little kind of hot off the press. I was hoping to have a little more data after Thanksgiving, but it just didn't come together. So these are training images from the multitude of parasites around the world that we're trying to teach this AI model to identify. So you can see the Paragonimus eggs at the top look fantastic with great confidence. Strongyloides, these worms are actually too big to train. So we taught the AI to recognize the mouth and the tail. And so that's all it's looking for. And it works very well. Our hookworm eggs at the top here, again, just detect very well. Clinorchus in the bottom, great recall. You see these are almost all 100% or 99% confidence. Anterobius are pinworms, which again, we don't see in stool very often, but we sometimes do, so we have to make sure the model can recognize them. Ascaris, which we probably see more than anything, but those eggs are highly variable in size and shape. So we have to teach the different fertilized, unfertilized states because they're different shapes and sizes. Again, the Plantioides, very rare, but we need to be able to recognize it. Cystoisospora belli, the largest of the protozoa, the coccidians. And then Schistosoma mansoni, you can see the nice lateral spine in the bottom right image. So that's what we're working on now. We're getting very close to having a finished model for the web mount that covers all of the major parasites that you can detect in stool. And it's no small feat because the target list is over 40. And so I say more to come here. We're still finishing a few rare organisms we ran into the point where we just didn't have some of these parasites. So on the left there, that's an image of a cooler that was sent to us from Africa from collaborators with stool from patients suspected of having some of these rare parasites. And then on the right is a cow patty, because we collaborated with some veterinary labs in Texas and Iowa and Africa. They're able to send us cow stool to get these last two parasites that we could not get human cases of. And it turns out, if you know the biology, that the cows shed the same eggs we do. So we purified the eggs from the cow stool and then doped them back into human stool to make the stool trainable for our AI model. So a lot of stool processing even for humans and cows. And that's what AI wants to do with those images. This is what it says a cooler full of stool parasites should look like. And this is a lonely cow on the Texas plains with stool patty. So with that, I want to acknowledge lots of people from different groups that made all this work possible. Our R&D group at ARUP, collaborators at TechSite, and then of course the Parasitology Lab that embraces technology, brought it in, absolutely fell in love with how much it made their job easier and more enjoyable. So with that, I will open up to any questions, and thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was wonderful. We have, at least 4 minutes perhaps for questions, and Dr. Couturier would be happy to answer any of them. So don't be shy about asking any questions.
Pat, can I ask a question? This is Tony.
Absolutely. Please go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent. Really fascinating presentation. I have a question about the regulatory aspects of this and how CAP and FDA view this technology in the lab currently.
Yeah, great question. So we've been inspected by CAP 3 times since we've been using this. And I think right now CAP actually has a committee that's trying to do checklist development, because there's really not a great comprehensive checklist for AI, especially on the CP side. So every inspector we've had has felt like we're kind of going above and beyond for our QC. Like, it's because there's no really good standards. I have the lab do kind of over the top QC. So every day when they run control scans, they're counting manually and confirming if the AI says there's 400 cryptosporidium on that slide. I have someone look at all 400 images, and they fill in a QC electronic data sheet and report how many are true positive, how many are false positive. And then we have our established range on those slides to know potentially if there's degradation toward under detection, as well as if there's degradation toward false positives. The CAP inspectors have basically felt like that's really heavy, but I just feel like in the absence of good guidance that I don't want to scale back on that. FDA is interesting. So this model that we use, TechSite's actually bringing it to the FDA. They are planning on submitting it to the FDA. The regulatory pathway is interesting because it's not getting marketed as a diagnostic tool. It's kind of a finding tool. It just brings your attention to things, but it's not generating a definitive answer. And that's how they're trying to put it through the FDA, unlike some of the other products on the market, like Celavision, which does do the full classification, and you can change stuff, if you reclassify stuff, but in general, it is confidently calling things out. I think the approach that they're trying to take with the FDA and the discussions they've had is to have it really just give a screening role to draw flag attention to things and then confirm things on the slides for the suspected positives.
But if I understood you correctly, if the AI comes back with a negative result and there's no further action taken on that sample?
Yeah.
Or did I misunderstand?
Right. So the negatives, I showed you on like the interface when I logged in to show you what a typical negative looks like. The negatives still show you boxed organisms, or objects, I should say, because it's just the way we've tuned the confidence cutoff. So it is non-specific. It's very non-specific. So its chance of missing a true positive are very low. And that's why we did the studies with the LOD and the accuracy versus the humans to establish that humans missed more often than the AI did. So that was the kind of the goal of that data, was to try to establish that
Right.
yes, it's possible to miss something, but it's missing it at a significantly less frequent
Right.
level than the humans currently do.
Right. So there's no method that's absolutely infallible, and your comparator is humans who can make mistakes.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
again,
okay.
not to throw my staff under the bus by any means. I think
Sure,
our staff
sure,
are
sure.
amazing, but
Yeah,
it's just
yeah.
it's hard.
Thank you.
And I think we also have the
you.
benefit of not dealing with things like cancer. I mean, our detections are much lower risk.
We have time for one more question. Kay Garen, do you have a relatively quick question?
I do, kind of on the same lines as Dr. Colleen. So this is considered a lab developed test, correct? And then you would follow those same guidelines on your CAP?
Yeah, so that's where the question has come in. All of our inspectors have agreed with us that it's not a test.
Okay.
And so we did a full validation to New York State standards, in case we had to submit anything to them, and also to help if we had to submit to FDA eventually. So our validation was actually quite detailed. But the discussions that we had with CAP and even with a gentleman with FDA that I was talking to, kind of all agreed that it's hard to call it a test when it's not really standalone and doing anything. It's part of a total process, like your liquid handler, like your thermocycler, and they're aiding in the final result, but they're not the only factor in the final result. And that's where the confusion's kind of coming in, where there's no regulatory written yet.
Thank you.
Dr. Kubiak, did you have a question or comment for Dr. Couturier?
No, there's a lot of things I could ask about the validation, but not at the end of grand rounds right now.
Okay. Well,
And
again,
I will say I really minimized the details of the validation. There was a lot more than went into it. But just in the interest of time, I didn't want to do a validation talk because that could be pretty dry.
well, I thought your talk was wonderful, Mark, and we really appreciate your being with us, although virtually, and I look forward to interacting with you again, and we may call upon you as we get farther into the process here and so on. But I think we really enjoyed this, and I hope you get over your cough, but I think it's one of the common viruses, so don't worry.
It was parainfluenza 3. I did test myself. But yeah, if anyone does want to ask more questions or even chat by Zoom, my email address was on my slides. Feel free to reach out. I'm happy to do that.
We may want to take advantage of your generous offer as a group as we move forward, Mark, but it won't be within the next couple of weeks. Okay.
Anytime, just let me know.
Well, have a wonderful holiday and look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you all as well.
Bye-bye now.
Have a great day.